When we talk about creation these days, a lot of people want to make it a big argument as to whether God created the world in a literal 6 days or He did it through some kind of God-directed process of evolution over a long period of time. But in the midst of all the arguments, it's easy to get lost and miss the one all-important truth that the creation account teaches us. Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Do you know what that means? Everything begins with God. The world is only here because He had a purpose for it. You and I are only here because God had a purpose for it. I wasn't here at the beginning. You weren't here at the beginning. Yet it's so easy for us to get confused and to forget that life is not about our goals and our desires and our plans. And sometimes we think it is, and we even begin to seek God just to get His help and His power to try to accomplish our goals and our plans. But Genesis 1 reminds me that this is God's world, and I am a part of His world. It reminds me that He's the Creator, and I am His creation. The creation story reminds me that everything about me was designed for Him. Everything in my life flows from His purposes for which He gave me life in the first place. I know all of that just from verse 1. Chapters 1 and 2 make it clear that everything that's needed for life, all of it, it comes from Him. When He created us in His image, it tells us that we were meant to be like Him. We were made to know Him, to relate with Him, and communicate with Him. He gives Adam responsibility in the garden and over all of creation. He gives him dominion and authority over all of the animals. But not because He was making Adam and all of his descendants the kings of their universe. He was making us stewards as His representatives in His world for His purposes. When God told Adam not to eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what He was communicating is, let me be God. Trust me to decide what's right and what's wrong. Trust me to decide what's good and what's bad. And the temptation of the devil in chapter 3 is exactly what we heard Paul talking about yesterday in Romans chapter 1. He deceives Adam and Eve into believing that life really isn't freely all given by God, that if we really want to live, we need to reach out and grab it for ourselves. He tempted them to believe that they could be God, that they could decide what was right and what was wrong for their own glory. They stopped acknowledging God as God, and everything went downhill from there. Now, the perfect world that was filled with the goodness of God for them to enjoy was a fallen world filled with pain and shame and sin and death. That's what happens when people stop acknowledging God as God. And that's still the problem from day to day now. Whenever I sin, whenever you sin, we are momentarily forgetting that God is God. We are momentarily deceived into thinking that we can be God, that God exists to serve us for our own purposes. So in Genesis 1 to 3, we see the sinful heart of man very clearly. And we also see the merciful heart of God. I love this. Listen, God could have just killed Adam and Eve, and He would have been righteous and just to do so. But He didn't do that. You know what He did? He pursued them. He didn't kill them. He killed an animal instead. And He made a garment for them to cover the shame that they were feeling because they had discovered that they were naked. And that same mercy of God is the mercy He shows to us. Because what He did there was a preview for what He would do at the cross thousands of years later, where God covered our shame by taking our sin onto Himself, not by killing an animal, but by giving His own life for us. You see, when God sent Adam and Eve out of the garden, He Himself was already on the way to the cross.